Over the next few projects, we are going to paint this entire car with overspray from other projects. Nope. Welcome to Dirt, Sweat, and Gears, where I am in an abusive relationship with 10 cars. But we're not going to be working on cars in this video. In this video, we're going to be taking on a carpentry project. If you've been following my garage and ADU progress build, you know that I'm basically done with my ADU with a couple of things left pending. And we're going to take care of that in future video. But off camera, I have been rebuilding what used to be my office in my main house to be my wife's new crafting room. And in this video, we're going to build a cutting table for her in that new crafting room. Now, I have some experience with using crafting tables in the past. In a previous career, I was a graphic designer. And when I was a junior graphic designer, I did a lot of cutting at a cutting table. And the reason I know a lot about cutting tables is because I had a really terrible cutting table. You see, when I started working at this studio back in like 2007, we had a great work environment. We had dartboard, we had a pool table, we were hyper creative, and our job was basically to bail out projects that were at risk of failure. And so everything was high pace, high stress, high stakes, and we were constantly just rising to the challenge over and over and over again. And that was my job. It was really stressful. It was very rewarding, but it was also short-lived. I'm not going to name names because they are all industry professionals, and I consider myself a professional, but the work environment changed. It was rough. Still highly creative, still high stakes, fast pace, but very, very challenging to your soul. And part of my job was to prepare client presentations. So that meant printing things out, taking it to our cutting table, trimming all of the edges and the corners, and mounting it on a blackboard. But here's the real problem that I had. Our cutting table was a pool table with a sheet of plywood over it. So what happens when your cutting table is a pool table with a sheet of plywood over it? This is what happens when your cutting table is a sheet of plywood on a pool table. It bends. And what happens when the surface you're trying to cut on is bent? It becomes impossible to make a straight cut. And guess what? That didn't change anything. I was still expected to make perfect cuts, and I was still expected to have all of my measurements done by my eyes. I wasn't allowed to use a ruler. I wasn't allowed to use anything but my eyes to measure and perfectly cut and center everything. So I know a lot about what not to do with a cutting table. So when my wife asked me to build a cutting table, I said, I gotcha. So instead of just cutting into expensive pieces of wood like I usually do, I decided to prepare for this project. And I gotta tell you, I'm more prepared for this project than I have ever been for any carpentry project that I've taken on before. So let's talk about some of the requirements of a cutting table. The general requirements is that it needs to be strong, it needs to be flat, and it needs to be ergonomic. It really just needs to be a place that you can focus your attention so that you can cut what you're cutting without cutting things you don't want to cut, because I've done that too. On top of general requirements, my wife has some specific requirements because she is cutting fabrics on this table. So the first requirement is that it needs to be mobile. It needs to be on wheels so that she can move it around the room and reposition it depending on what she is doing with it. It's going to be more than just a cutting table. It's going to be kind of a multi-use table, but its primary purpose will be to cut things. She's going to have a cutting mat, so the surface of it isn't all that important as long as it is strong enough to hold some weight without bowing. And she also wants to take advantage of its height by putting storage underneath it. And we're also going to have a pegboard on either side of it so that she could hang threads, yarn, or tools off of the sides. So on top of general requirements and her usage requirements, there's also some spatial requirements. This thing can't be too wide. It has to be able to fit through the door of my house. So let's take a look at the concept sketches because that's going to give us an idea of our dimensions and how we're going to build this thing. This is our concept sketch. I know I said that I was a graphic designer, but I wasn't a very good artist. So it's basically just a bunch of boxes on a page. So this is our cutting table here. We're going to have a flat solid top and an array of 6 boxes on either side. Those 6 boxes are going to be just a pass-through. So I don't need to build 12 boxes, I just need to build 6. And those boxes are going to have shelves on the inside. So I'm going to build the sides of this box out of 1/2-inch plywood. These boxes are going to have inner measurements of 12 inch by 12 inch by 12 inch. So that means we're going to have 12 inches plus a 1/2 inch plus 12 inches plus a 1/2 inch. So that's going to be 12, 24, 36, 37 inches from one side to the next. All right. We're going to have plywood top and bottom, and that is all going to rest on top of a frame that is going to rest on top of the wheels. Our total height, we're aiming for somewhere between 33 and 36 inches. And this gives us enough wiggle room to add or remove material to get in that desired range. The wheels are self-locking. I'll show them to you in just a bit. And we may end up being able to build a little bonus shelf underneath. That is kind of a stretch goal at this point. I'm not committing to actually doing it, but if we have the space and the materials, I figure why not. These down here were some ideas I was kicking around for an X pattern inside of the boxes, but that was something that my wife decided she didn't need. So flat panels with pass-through to the other side is going to be perfect for her, and that makes my life a whole lot easier. Here I've also done some math on the sheets of plywood that I'm going to need. What I have is definitely not enough. This is 1/2 inch, and I thought I had another full sheet of 1/2 inch. Turns out the other sheet I have is 3/4 inch for my bookshelf project that is coming up. So I'm going to need definitely to get another sheet of 1/2 inch, but I can get started on this either way. So in terms of materials, I'm going to need 4 panels for the sides at 24 by 24 inches. And then I'm going to need shelves at 12 by 24 inches. In between the vertical panels, I'm going to cut slots for these 12 by 24 panels to slide in. I haven't fully envisioned the frame yet, but that's not that big of a challenge. It's basically just 2x4s that are plumbed up to hold the structure. And on top of that, we're going to have a proper tabletop surface that we may cut into our 3/4 inch plywood for that. So with our concept sketches and our materials, it's time to start measuring to find out just how screwed I really am on materials. So I'm going to start taking some measurements, and I'll check back in with you in a little bit. I have measured out the sheet of plywood in front of me, and I definitely do not have enough. But now I know how short I am. Basically what it comes down to is I am short these 4 panels here on the inside of the table. And I'm going to have to cut those out of the 3/4 inch. That's not so bad because now that gives me plenty of room to cut 1/4 inch slots into these inner panels in order to fit these shelves. So we've got 3 shelves measured out here at 24 by 12.5. And then we've got the top and bottom panels, which came out to 39 by 24 to account for the extra space for the width of the 3/4 inch plywood. after making all of my cuts, my camera ran out of battery. So I decided to press on with a little bit of the assembly of the boxes. And I have to say, it turned out much better than I thought it would. So there were two major flaws here. And the first flaw was in my technique. You see, when I took my measurements, I did not account for the width of the saw blade when I was making my measurements. So that meant that because of the width of the saw blade, every cut got progressively more and more out of original spec. So instead of measuring everything out, drawing the lines, and cutting along all of those lines, I should have double checked my measurements in between every cut. That would have avoided some of the issues that I had with fitment. The other failure I had was an equipment failure. You see, this table saw is very old. It's given me many, many years, way beyond what a cheap Craftsman table saw should be. And the major problem with this thing is this guide is horrible. Watch how far I can clamp this thing down with this thing out of a square. You see the line in the table? I can just go way off of it, clamp this thing down, and lock it in like that. So as it's making the cut, it's just dragging the line over as I push the wood. So this becomes very, very difficult to line up correctly. I have to eyeball it off of a point of reference. I mean, fortunately, as I mentioned earlier in this video, I have had lots of practice eyeballing measurements, but I really don't enjoy it, and sometimes when you get it wrong, it's extremely, extremely frustrating. And that mainly came into play when it came to these routing cuts. You see, this one right here has it's like a hot dog in a hallway. There is so much space for that wood to slot in there, and that is because of that stupid guide. I did decide to deconstruct this thing and to glue it and re-nail it. I got most of it nice and tight except for that little spot right there. I'm just going to have to live with it. I put in a few dozen extra nails just to be safe. You'll notice that I also cross-braced with additional pieces of wood, and that was just because when I was flipping it over, I wanted it to hold its shape while I removed this top piece, and that was mostly successful. Everything still seems to be holding it square. And just to double check, that's pretty good. That's okay. That's good enough for government. Can probably knock it over just a tad. Yeah, it's all close. It's all very close. The next thing I want to do is start working on the frame. I've been taking measurements and coming up with some ideas. I want to do the frame with the 2x4s on their sides like this, and then I'm going to do a miter cut so that I have a nice edge here, and then we're going to mount the wheels on each corner like that. And they're going to be inset about 1.5 inches. That makes the cut from miter cut to miter cut a nice even 36 inches. So it's a lot easier to reconcile once I go to make the cut. And then on the other side here, I haven't measured it yet, but I hate this tape so much. And then on the other side here, we have a total of 24 inches. So inset that by 1.5 inches on either side. 24 minus 3 is 21. So 21 inches. On the top side, I want to have the 2x4s on either side upright so that I can put a tabletop on top of this. So we'll have a nice little slot for, things, stencils, cutting mats, papers, whatever. And so this is not going to be a pass-through because I want to have as much structural integrity as I can get. I'm going to have probably a cross beam right down the middle here. That way we can keep it open here, probably add a support here so that we have 4 boxes on both sides of the table. But that idea is a little half-assed at this point. I need to get the bottom frame done, and then I can flip this over and we will know for sure what we want to do on the top. The next step here is going to be to level this out. And that's going to be a challenge between the imperfections in the 2x4s, the imperfections in the plywood, and the imperfections in my skills. I am expecting the worst here, but we'll see how it goes. I am anticipating a lot of sanding, and I'm gonna, since this is not secured at all, I'm going to start by leveling out the 2x4s. And once I think I've got the 2x4s leveled out, we'll work on the tabletop. I'm going to trim it down, and then we're going to take the 2x4 frame off, secure this to the frame, put it back on, and then re-level. I am completely expecting this to be a nightmare, pain in the ass, and a total failure. And I also expect it to be very boring, so I'm not going to record it. I'll just check in with you once I have something to report. Well, it turned out this wasn't as frustrating as I thought it would be, but it was every bit as boring as I imagined. It took a lot of sanding and a trip to the hardware store to get more sandpaper to get this all leveled out. So what I noticed was that it was a little bit higher in the center, so I had to knock that down, and then I had to knock down section by section, moving the level from one corner to the next, from one section to the next, in order to see my high and low spots, as well as to see that it was overall level. And I was very pleasantly surprised at how level it was. There was just high and low spots where like the beams had been warped, because every Home Depot 2x4 is a complete boomerang, and so I had to just kind of go around and around and around and around with the sander until I got that all leveled out. Once I got that leveled out, I threw the piece of ply on top, clamped it down, and because I did not have more than 4 clamps, I tossed a battery on top to hold the rest of it down, and then nailed it in from there. Of course, between the 2x4s and the plywood is some glue. So I am just kind of waiting for the glue to set now. Once the glue is set, I can take this whole section off and unscrew 4 screws. No, I have 6 screws underneath here. There's 2 here, 2 in the middle, 2 on the other side. Take this whole top assembly off, and I'll be able to finish the insides of these cabinets here. I decided to add some additional cross bracing on the inside of the pass-throughs. So they're not totally a pass-through, they're a pass most, I don't know. But the idea here was to eliminate racking when the wheels are locked, and my God, it makes a huge difference. This thing is way, way more sturdy than it was before I added those. The last thing that I experimented with was these trim pieces. This is as thin as I could get. I would have preferred to get a little bit thinner, but they did not have it at the hardware store right around the corner. So I am going to trim this off with the multi-tool, I think. I think that's going to be my only option, because I can already take this tabletop off, and I can just kind of run the multi-tool behind it and just trim it out so that we have a cover over the raw wood, but we can still slip things directly in through the shelf. The corners here, I can get corner pieces that wrap around nicely here to cover up this raw wood and go down. I'm going to do another piece like this down here, so it'll have like a little bit of a skirt at the bottom, and then run the corner piece down to the skirt. And here I'm also going to do corner pieces on this side of it, running down to meet the shelf, and then down to the bottom shelf. That would leave this space in the middle open for a removable shelf, but for a non-removable shelf, we'll have a nice edge covering the raw wood. I've finished adding all of the wood trim and doing the filling, and sanded everything down with 330 grit and then with 800. This table looks amazing. There's still some details here, like I want to get this all cleaned up and filled, but because we have to take the table off to get into the cupboards here, that's going to wait. Before I commit to staining this cutting table, I want to know what the stain is going to look like. So I have a scrap stick of wood that has been cut off from the sheets that I used to make this cutting table, and we're going to test all 5 of these stains to find out which one I want to use where. Now, these were collected over the course of several years, so I'm not telling you to go out and spend $50 on stain, but what I will say is that you should get what you think is going to work from your project, and then test that before you use that on your project. Because if you can't use that on your project, you can use it maybe on something else. It's not going to be quite as accurate as using a brush, but it's going to be good enough for our purposes here. And then when you're done with paper towel, you can just throw it out. You don't have to worry about cleaning. I've got these arranged from, well, more or less from light to dark, just to kind of make my life easier in case they get mixed up. Sometimes I prefer to number them, but in this case we've got 5, and we've got a strip of wood that is long enough for 5, so that's what we're doing. From left to right, we have spring oak, colonial maple, traditional cherry, golden oak, and Kona. So overall, I'm thinking the tabletop, I want to have a darker color, and the body, I want to have a lighter color. So for the body, I'm gravitating towards these 2, and for the top, I'm somewhere in between these 3. The rest of my house is traditional cherry, so I know that's a safe bet, but that's also the safe bet. I don't necessarily want to go with the safe bet every time I build something. I just check with the client, because the client's opinion is the one that matters the most, that being my wife. And we together decided on spring oak and golden oak. So this is going to be for the top. This is going to be for the body. So when we go to do the top, we're going to have to start with a fresh can. This, however, I can use the rest of this can to do the underside of the top, so that we can get yet another sample of what this thing is going to look like without committing to doing it on the top. finally have finished staining all 6 of the boxes. Oh, but now I got to do that all over again several more times with the clear coat. I have the top removed and upside down so that I can get the insides of the boxes. We're going to start up here and just work our way down. And because there isn't a whole lot of clean surfaces for this top to be upside down on, we're just putting it up here. And then once we get this area coated, we're going to set it over there somewhere-ish. I got to do like 3 coats on this whole damn thing, and it's a lot of effort. So I guess I better just get to it. This is the part that always burns me out. We're skipping ahead a little bit here because you really don't need to see all of the things that I just did in great detail. I've done it before, and you've seen it here on this channel. So I cleared the whole thing, I sanded it with 600, and then I cleared the whole thing and then sanded it with 800. The top, I cleared a 3rd time and sanded it yet again with 800. And then I went around this whole thing with my automotive polishing products and did a cut, polish, and wax of this entire table. And my God, it looks so good. The last thing that I have to do for this cutting table, as I mentioned per our requirements, was to have pegboards on both sides. I do have a stack of pegboards over here. They are left over from the previous iteration of my workbench. And they happen to be almost exactly the size that they need to be. There's just a little bit of trimming left to do. Once those are cut, I have to put spacers behind them to give room for the pegs to go into the pegboard and hook in. So I went to the hardware store and looked for spacers. Their spacers are so expensive. How expensive are they? No, it's actually not a joke. They're so expensive that they are behind lock and key because people steal them so much. This is a new thing. I guess prices on spacers are ridiculous. So we're going to space this out with scrap wood. Doesn't that sound like a great idea? When I have piles and piles of scrap lumber laying around. I've got this right here, this or that. This is a little bit cleaner. All you really need to do is cut out a square. I'm going to glue it right in the corner here and there and there and there, and that should be more than enough to hold up our pegboards. Once these are glued in and the glue is set, I can stick the pegboards on with finishing nails, and it'll just go right in and hopefully not come out the other side and make me upset. We are down here at my professional paint booth, and we are going to paint the pegboards. And my wife has chosen Color Shift Pink Champagne. So it's not my decision, so I don't know how this is going to turn out, but I hope she loves it. You may notice that we're not actually at a professional paint booth. The keen eye will notice that this is indeed a 1976 Triumph TR7. And that is because I have made the executive decision. Over the next few projects, we are going to paint this entire car with overspray from other projects. You may notice that there's a lot of streaks of blacks here also. And that's because, well, there's a little bit of rust. And I've decided to hit those spots with rust neutralizer. I still have to cover up the windows in order to do these areas as well as in front of the windshield. But this is going to be a several project long evolution. And hopefully at the end of it all, we're going to have a painted Triumph TR7. We're also going to have a lot of other painted car parts because there's a lot of painting projects coming up. And if you're going to paint an entire car, it's very important to properly prepare the surfaces, which is why I've done exactly none of that. There is adhesive everywhere. There is spots of rust. There is rust holes in various spots. And we're not doing any of it. We're not going to sand it or prep it or do anything in any way. We're just having really, really stupid fun with a really, really stupid car. I'm going to set the camera down and we're going to paint the TR7 Color Shift Pink Champagne. Maybe I'll paint this whole car with it. Well, apparently the can says to apply it over a black base coat. So I have painted this whole thing in a satin black and it has been drying for a while. While it was drying, I took the opportunity to tape off all of the windows of our paint booth and use up an entire can of rust neutralizer. You want to use rust neutralizer in only the problem areas. I can't even say that with a straight face. This car is so bad. But that's part of what makes these fun. You know, you can call this a cool car, you can call this a fun car, but I really hope no one is calling this a good car, because this is objectively a terrible car. I think we're making it less terrible, at the very least, getting some paint on it to help prevent it from rusting even more. I gotta say that pink-purple glitter might be a thing that this car sees in the future. It actually works better than I think it should. We have a wonderful pattern of dots here from our pegboards, both on the trunk lid and on the roof. I think it's just beautiful. It's perfect. It's exactly what this car deserves. Let's go take a look at our cutting table. Well, that's going to conclude our adventure here. I built a beautiful and very functional cutting table for my wife, and it didn't cost a whole lot of money. The total cost of this thing, including all the wood, all of the stain and polyurethane and materials and all the trim pieces, was around $200. Could you have bought a piece of furniture for that? Yeah, absolutely. But would it have looked this good? Probably not. Would it have been this strong? Definitely not. You are not going to get this quality of material, of strength out of an IKEA table. This thing is going to outlive us both. And with a little luck, when that day comes, somebody's going to look at this cutting table and say, oh my God, that's awesome. Somebody that I love built this thing, and I need to have it. Now, is it absolutely perfect? No, but the client said it's perfect. If you know anything about being married, my wife saying that this project came out perfect is the reason why I can work on projects like that. So, with that, if you like what you see, like, share, subscribe, and comment. And if you don't like what you see, maybe you think I should restore that TR7 properly, I want to hear from you. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.